Hello, everyone. I'm Mystery.
And I am Bolton Mortimer the Authenticator, and we are the Duality of Man.
Today, we're talking about men and ancient history because it's actually something that a lot of men think about on the regular, myself included.
Yeah, definitely me too. And we were originally just going to talk about the do men actually think about ancient Rome TikTok meme, but I kind of insisted that we expanded it out more because while Rome certainly is a topic that regularly does cross through, I think every historically literate man on Earth thinks about ancient Rome at least a couple times a week, if not more. It's far from the only ancient civilization that goes through your head if you happen to be a history buff or just, historically literate.
Yeah, Egypt, ancient Greece,
Ba-
obviously.
Babylon and Sumeria, the Celts, the
Yeah,
Age of Exploration.
Vikings.
The ancient Norse and Slavic regions. Um, on occasion even like ancient India or like the origins of Hinduism. So yeah, it's far
Feudal
from
Japan.
it. Yeah, it's yeah every child of the '90s anime boom, I'm sure thinks about feudal Japan at least twice or three times a week.
Yeah, but to make things a bit more recent, the Wild West.
Yeah, I mean, and in my case, I think a lot about the Victorian era, and recently, especially, I've been thinking a lot about the like traveling freak show or the traveling medicine show from like the last, like the 1800s.
Yep.
It's I don't know why it's taken me this long to actually bother getting books on the topic, but I finally just was like, hey, I've absorbed information on this via documentaries and stuff before, but I've never actually sat down and read books on it. So I searched in Amazon, and lo and behold, I now have 6 books in my Amazon cart on the traveling medicine show, the traveling salesman, and the traveling freak show.
So let me ask you something regarding these, bygone eras. What's one of the things that most appeals to you about them?
I think honestly, and this is somewhat counterintuitive to the way I think a lot of people think about history, but a lot of ways about it is the continuity between then and now. Both the both the things that are unique to the various eras, but also the things that really haven't changed. And obviously, we have made hashtag progress, GM, but it's not a Hegelian system. It's not a one direction of history or the end of history type thing, as much as the Hegelian and descended from Hegelian ways of thinking would tell you that it's all about progress, thesis, antithesis, end of history bullshit. I find it more interesting that, as a general rule, you don't get a unidirectional pace of history. What you get is give and take. You make progress, but that progress usually comes at the expense of something. Um,
Yeah, cultures would sometimes, start out from a similar origin, diverge, and then on occasions clash, and one culture would fall, another would, rise, and oftentimes they would, like assimilate certain aspects of the defeated culture into their own.
well, and it's not even necessarily about the clashing of cultures necessarily. Even a single culture can go through this, win, give and take scenario. Like for example, I think I can speak for everyone when I say the like Gothic and Art Deco periods, like in the Victorian era and the turn of the Victorian era into the Edwardian era, for all of the various, possibly stuffy, possibly prudish social values that the Victorians and the Edwardians had, they knew about style, like the way people dressed, the way architecture worked, the way even the way pieces of technology. function. Like, for example, I own a replica of a gramophone style record player. And I think we've lost something in the idea of street streamlining everything, minimalism, turning everything into sleek and modernistic things. We've lost a lot of that. It's not just enough to have a function. You also need to have a artistic and like material style, and like there needs to be more metaphysical value to the thing you're
Yeah,
making.
we've lost the aesthetic quality, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and yeah, and obviously I don't want to. I don't want to become a neo-Luddite and go. I don't want to be one of those people who's like, it was better back in the Victorian era, so we need to replicate everything the Victorians did. I'm not that kind of person, but to say that we have had this, Hegelian universal streamlining of history and everything is better now than it was back then is just plain false. There's a reason why we have things like the steampunk subculture or Renaissance fairs or historical reenactments or hell, even to an extent, the reason why I think a lot of polytheistic religions are back on the rise. You have people re-embracing heathenry and the Norse gods. You have people re-embracing the Greek gods and the Roman pantheons and so on. I think to some extent there's an understanding on some intuitive level that for all that we have gained, we've also lost things along the way. And by no means am I saying we need to hashtag return to tradition because I'm not a traditionalist by any stretch of the imagination, as you might be able to gather from all the times where I bitch and moan about traditionalism. But I think there's something to be said for trying to recapture the good old days, the stuff that was good about the past, while still keeping as much of modernity as we can without allowing essentially allowing the two to have a matter antimatter annihilation moment. Could you? And I find it interesting that for all that like modern hipsters are so very hashtag progressive, there is a subset of millennials and Gen Z that genuinely do love recapturing um, the values and virtues of old. Like there are so many YouTube channels that are all about reconnecting to those lost arts, those like mythical aspects of history. Like obviously you have people like Shadowversity, um, who is the medieval and pre-medieval weapons expert par excellence. But you also have people like Max Miller from Tasting History or B. Dylan Hollis, who recently wrote a book called Baking Yesteryear and who specialized in recreating obscure recipes from the last century or so.
There's
Both
also a really great uh, YouTube channel called The Townsends, which
I
is
love the Townsends. I Speaking of people who need to write cookbooks, I want the like best of the 18th century cookbook or something from him already because he had like obviously I know he gets these recipes out of pre-existing cookbooks, but just like Max Miller was able to make the Tasting History cookbook and B. Dylan Hollis was able to make the Baking Yesteryear cookbook, both of which I happen to own because I'm a fan of historical cooking. It's one of my favorite sort of sub geekdoms of history. Um, but someone needs to tell John Townsend to get a freaking like 18th century cookbook condensed already. I want
uh,
to own that.
yeah. Speak. There is one thing I want to mention before I mention my next point, but you mentioned before about the style of the Victorian era, and like a lot of the things that they used to wear, just every day, just to walk about the street, is a lot of what people would now consider to be very dressed up.
Yeah, like
And I actually was at a was at a party recently, and I was the only one there that wore a suit. And you know, Pete, and one of my friends made a comment afterwards. So like, how could he be comfortable wearing a suit all night, and like I was extremely comfortable. Like it's not uncomfortable to wear a suit, and like people used to wear suits literally every day, all day.
Not to toot my own horn here or anything, but there is a reason why I wear bow ties and top hats every single day of my life. Um, I started wearing bow ties the first day of my senior year, and I have never been more comfortable in my entire life than when I made that choice. Because when I was younger, I used to believe that that was something you had to earn, that you had to be like someone important, like a professor or an intellectual, to dress like that. And then, um, this is incredibly geeky, but then the 11th Doctor era of Doctor Who happened. And of course, as everyone remembers, the bow tie is cool, and it basically reignited a lot of people's love for bow ties. And eventually, I was just like, you know what, screw it. And then I asked my mom about it when it came time to do school shopping. I told her basically that I wanted to wear bow ties. I thought that she was going to whine and complain that that was too fancy or that that was too dressed up, but she was okay with it. And then I started wearing bow ties on the first day of my senior year of high school, and I have worn bow ties every time I've gotten dressed pretty much since then. And I would never look back. And a lot of people do often ask me like, why are you so dressed up all the time? But it's like, one, it's really not anymore. It's like wearing a bow tie and a button up is is not very much more dressed up than um, just wearing an average button up. It's just a matter of putting in that extra little bit of effort. And you would be amazed how many compliments I get on a regular basis. Like every time I leave the house, someone somewhere compliments me on, I like your bow tie, I like your top hat. And then people wonder why I put in that effort. It's like, one, people notice. Two, it's a meritocratic way of dressing. And three, it's and this is maybe something that we've lost. The way someone dresses or the aesthetics they choose, be it, in their household, be it in their personal sense of style, so on, are reflections of who they are as a person. And that was something that I always felt was lacking when I just wore regular clothes. Was it didn't feel like I was living up to my own image of myself. And then I started wearing bow ties, and my confidence and my sociability went up significantly because the person I was on the outside started to match the person who I was on the inside.
Yeah, I completely know what you mean. I always feel better, more confident in myself whenever I'm in a suit, and I also get a lot of compliments when I wear them too. Like, unfortunately, like my job and where I work doesn't really,
Is not
it doesn't
conducive.
make, yeah, it's not conducive to wearing a suit every day. But if I could and have the number of suits to wear every day, I absolutely would.
Yeah, I basically abandoned all other forms of clothes when I finally did hit that self actualization moment. So like my entire closet is just button ups. And I actually kind of get insulted and offended when people suggest that I would be okay with wearing t-shirts. Like it actually makes me feel ill now whenever I consider wearing anything else, because again, it's when the person I am on the outside matches the person I am on the inside. And I actually kind of feel stupid for not owning up to that sooner. And that's one thing that I would change if I could go back in time. Is I would tell my incredibly naive younger self, no, you don't have to wait until you are respectable to dress this way. You can just start dressing this way. And
Yeah,
I
like
think I think my social life in high school would have been better, based on, if nothing else, the evidence of how it improved in my senior year, had I actually been okay with being who I was the whole time, instead of trying to conform to someone else's definition of what is normal.
it's like what I want to just not look my best, but feel my best. I'll wear a suit. And
Hmm.
like I said, I wish I could wear them every day, but like my job, like it gets very dirty sometimes, and like that's why I wear like t-shirts because I don't care if they get dirty.
Yeah,
But
it's
like if
yeah,
something were to happen to one of my suits, I
I
would
get it,
definitely care.
but one, I don't think I will ever, being as I am a 5'5" manlet, I'm never going to be doing manual labor, and even if I was going to be doing manual labor, I would be that stubborn bitch and be like, no, I don't care if I'm doing manual labor, I'm still gonna freaking wear a suit. like
Well,
I I often imagine, like, if I ever decided to go to a gym, I would be so out of place because I would still be wearing a suit while in the gym.
so one of the things that always appealed to me about these bygone eras is that a person really did have a lot more freedom back then. Now, for example, like there were oppressive times obviously in the past, and we didn't have as much convenience or luxury. But like when you were out on your own, like you were actually on your own. Like there was no phone to keep the world constantly being able to annoy the heck out of you. There was no
Micromanage, yeah.
yeah, there was no government constantly surveilling everything you did. In fact, the government may not even know that you even exist, which is by God, I'd kill for that.
You will not escape the all-seeing eye of the government. We will know who you are and where you are at all times, and you will not get any say in this. But something that's worth noting about this, because I know a lot of people would bitch at us for being nostalgic for bygone eras that never were, or even go so far as to call us fascists for for, for, for preferring the ideals of previous eras. But that's the thing. When people get this kind of nostalgia, they don't get nostalgia for the cholera or the Black Plague or the dirty underbelly of these eras. But it's not the dirty underbellies of these eras that people are lionizing. It's the unique merits of these periods. Like, again, it took just about 100 years before people were nostalgic enough for like the medieval sensibilities of things to hold the first Renaissance fair. The first Renaissance fair was in like the late 1700s, which, all things considered, is only what, like 200-300 years distant from the medieval period they were talking about.
Yeah,
Um,
and I actually heard about this recently that the first Western films were actually so close to the Wild West that Wyatt Earp was actually a consultant on some of them.
yeah, it was in living memory of some of the people, and some of the people that were archetyped. Some of the people who became the Western archetypes, like your Wyatt Earp, were still alive and kicking when this phenomena was going on. Um, and the same is true, um, albeit to a lesser extent, with the rise of steampunk in the 70s and 80s. You know that in the same way as the Renaissance fair, um, lionized the best parts of the pre-modern era, so too the steampunk sort of subculture lionized the best parts of the um, the Victorian era and the Edwardian era. And the thing is, I know of one organization that is like almost synonymous with the Renaissance fairs and that kind of thing. It's called the Society for Creative Anachronism. And they brush up against this idea of how much of the past should we replicate versus how much of it should we idealize, or should we basically make the era as it should have been. And that is sort of a motto of the SCA, is we're not merely replicating the era, we're replicating the era as it would have liked to have been. And that's the thing. Not only are we idealizing these eras in a modern context, we're often we're often revivifying the way these eras viewed themselves, i.e., um, the modern Renaissance fair is different from the way the Renaissance may have actually been, but it is very similar to how the Renaissance literature chose to depict itself. It's sort of, not only are we nostalgically idealizing history, but we're basically recapturing the mindset of the people of that time and how they would have. It's basically how they would have chosen to be remembered. In the same way as people in today's day and age also get nostalgic for times like the 50s and 60s, and of course the 50s and 60s had the dark underbelly that everyone is so fearful of, and there's some like there's some reason for that because the past did suck in a lot of ways. But
When I think of the '60s and '70s, like a lot of what I wish I could have been there for was like the underground punk movements of those
yeah,
times.
yeah, the like flower power prog rock sort of thing, and I think I speak for basically everyone in and around our generations when I say Scooby Doo, the original '60s Scooby Doo, Where Are You, was basically a '60s time capsule. That's what I think of when I think of the '60s. I think of ascots and flower power and psychedelia and malt shops and whatever else. And the same is true, I'm sure, for people who lionize the 50s. They're not lionizing the prejudice and the Jim Crow and the various different kinds of my historical oppression. They're lionizing the like Leave It to Beaver, Dick Van Dyke sort of the way the 60s saw itself at its best. And
Like the kind of nuclear family, white picket fence, baseball, apple pie, like
yeah, the
typical
the
like Americana.
the like to use a modern example, the West view of it all, or the Pleasantville effect. And I see nothing wrong with recapturing some of the taking the cream of the crop of these historical eras and bringing whatever we can of that back. Like we can bring back the Renaissance fair. We can bring back the stuff you learn in the Society for Creative Anachronism. We can bring back the good parts of the Victorian era or the traveling freak show or the medicine show or what have you, and we can leave behind the bits that aren't fit for purpose, and we can unite what's good about the modern era with what's good about these other eras. Because one thing that modernism does create that is a negative, I think, again, is that idea of everything should be streamlined, everything should be stripped down to its bare bones functionality. There should be no room for idealism, there should be no room for aesthetics, there should be no room for style. There should be no room for meritocracy or expertise or anything. It's just no. That's a world devoid of like deliberately sterile almost, and that's why I think so much of the modern definition of the word realism is take take reality and remove all the interesting stuff from it, and double down on like the nihilistic gray stone cubicles of it all.
Yeah, it's just like people who want to sacrifice literally all of history on the altar of progressivism is like they want to like they want to push for like progress so much that they're willing to like sacrifice literally everything that was good that came before.
Well, it's again goes back to Hegel and how I still maintain that Hegel and Rousseau together basically birthed everything that is wrong about modern day philosophy. Hegel's idea of history was that history was a unidirectional, constantly moving forward um, mechanism. He called it the dialectical view of history, where he said that all of history was the history of conflict between a thesis and an antithesis, and that eventually you would just run out of conflicts to have, and that would be the end of history. And that simply isn't the case. Not only because history doesn't move in one direction. As we just went over, there are plenty of ways in which history is more about give and take than it is about moving forward. TM. But
Yeah, the thing is
but
like
also it's not the history of conflict. So much of what makes history worthwhile is the continuity of it all. Not what makes us different from the people in the past, but what reminds us that the people in the past were just as three-dimensional and human as we are.
like they always talk about how because something is like old or antiquated, that what is new or current or modern must inherently be superior, and that's just a really bad a really bad way to look at things, because there are lots of things that have existed for an incredibly long time, but we continue to use them because they work. Like we still make things out of steel, and how long has mankind had steel?
Um, considering the Iron Age was what, like 3,000-4,000 years ago now, um, quite a while. But even more so, the funny thing is, I find a lot of modern day traditionalists do the same shit in the sense that they strawman history. Um, in a lot of ways, the biggest complaint I have towards most traditionalists is a lot of traditionalists will just straight up embrace the revisionist history um of the progressive wing, and the only difference is they will Chad yes it. Like they will unironically embrace the idea that the past was a patriarchy when all of the historical records suggest that it wasn't, and that men always tried to protect and provide for their women because frankly, that's just what a human being is. We
Yeah,
are gynocentric. We are extremely devoted to protecting and providing for women and children. We always have viewed men as basically beasts of burden, and that part never gets acknowledged. And so what you wind up with is the traditionalists basically taking the worst aspects of the progressive framework and Chad yesing it, therefore basically becoming their own straw man. Um,
and like
and then you
another
and then you've got the progressives reinventing shit that's always been the case and acting like they were the ones that discovered it.
yeah, and like another misconception that people always talk about, like women have always held some form of power throughout society. The thing is, like people don't consider power unless there's like actual a title attached to it. Like
Well,
there is such a thing as soft power, and women have wielded it a lot through history. I mean, like just for example, look at Shakespeare's Macbeth. Like there is a reason he wrote Lady Macbeth the way he did.
yeah, he didn't invent the Lady Macbeth archetype from whole cloth, people. Um, and nor is the Bill and Hillary Clinton thing a modern like the whole like sitcom trope of the you're sleeping on the couch tonight, or the poor put upon man going yes dear to everything his wife wants. That's not a modern phenomena, and it wasn't a phenomena that was created the moment women had the vote either, because most of the time when wealthy landowning men, for it was only them, it wasn't all men even, that had the vote, when you voted on the behalf of your entire household. And who runs the household again? Oh, that's right, that would be the mistress who runs the household. And don't you dare tell me that there was never, prior to universal suffrage, a conversation where a woman went, "You will vote this way, or you will not be eating tonight." Especially when you consider that prior to automation and electricity, it was the women who would take care of the automation of the household, the cooking, the cleaning, um, the paying for the servants, etc., and so on, the managing of the finances. So if you didn't vote the way your wife wanted to in the era prior to universal suffrage, you didn't eat, maybe.
And also, here's another common misconception. It's about spousal abuse in in, um, in the past. Like, it was never accepted as just like a a thing. Like, it was never societally accepted for men to just beating on their wives. Because here's the thing, like, a lot of times they would go out of their way to hide that it was happening. Like, women would put makeup over the bruises, or the husband would hit them in a way that in a way that it wouldn't show up, like if a woman was wearing like fully clothed, and because
Mhm.
they knew that if they found out that, people would be upset that this was happening. It was never accepted that this was happening on. They People knew that it sometimes happened, but it wasn't a thing that people just said, "Hey, it's fine."
And as usual, getting on the men's rights horse here, um, one of the most pernicious ways of modern feminism rewriting history, be it ancient history, be it modern history, be it somewhere in between, um, is the idea that every oppressive or negative aspect of history affected women worse and or didn't affect men hardly at all. And I'm sorry, I'm sorry, women of the world, and in particular feminists, but yes, women were oppressed, but they were very seldom, if ever, oppressed because they were women. Because the oppression that you're noticing that applies to women applied to men at least as much, if not worse. And like we just got done going over, um, like we just got done going over, um, the the fact of the matter was that men held overt power over institutions and formal structures and things outside of the home, but women held covert power over the moral hierarchy, the household, and the domestic sphere.
Yeah, and the thing is, women were often seen as things to be cherished and protected, and should remain unspoiled. And women themselves viewed themselves that way, and often worked very hard to maintain that image of themselves. For example, like say a man, like, grabbed on a woman, or like say, or hit a woman in public. Like, like, if a man like dishonored a woman in that way, she could get other people to duel him for dishonoring her.
Yeah, the angry mob, or the white knight is called the white knight, not just because it's romantic imagery, but because in the Middle Ages a woman could literally select a champion, usually another man, and have him beat the shit out of the other man in a duel.
Yeah, like
To the to the point that the marriage contract would often be up for grabs in such a situation, where if a man successfully white knighted for a woman, he could abolish the marriage to the man that she was already married to and marry her in his stead.
like, I mean, just imagine that, like, someone insults you or harms you, and someone else is so affronted by the idea that they are willing to risk their lives just to kill this person for dishonoring you.
Yeah, and you can basically go sick 'em, more or less. Not to mention that the phenomena of lynching was like, people had this straw man idea of lynching, that lynching was primarily about race, but it wasn't. The phenomena of lynching began when a woman's sexual honor was thought to be affronted, i.e., a woman claims that guy over there, and it was more about class than it was about race originally, deflowered her prior to marriage or prior to the proper decorum, and the angry mob would literally go about hanging him from a freaking tree.
Yeah, and one thing that remember in that hold on, I'm trying to recall it properly. You go on because I'm trying to remember this.
Yeah, but getting back into the categorically ancient portion of this, or the antecedents of this, it is worth noting that one of the oldest stories in the Western canon is the story of the Iliad, where literally entire nations went to war over the moral virtue of a woman. You know, Helen of Troy, the face that lost it, launched 1,000 ships, and therefore the woman who is indirectly responsible for the entire goddamn Trojan War.
In the Odyssey, when you think about it.
Well, yeah, there is no Odyssey without an Iliad. I mean, if Odysseus wasn't in Troy helping um, Agamemnon and company, then he doesn't need to sail home. Doesn't have the opportunity to piss off um,
Poseidon.
well, Poseidon, and I forget the name of the actual Cyclops who was the son that begat this whole thing. But yeah, he doesn't have an opportunity to run into the Cyclops, who is the son of Poseidon. Then Poseidon doesn't develop a vendetta against him, and then he presumably um, just lives out a happy life with Penelope, and no one is the wiser. But yeah, the oldest story, or one of the oldest stories in the entire Western canon, is literally a wealthy individual fell deeply in love with this woman who was already claimed, and then the two largest nations at the time in this particular period went at each other for multiple decades.
Yeah. Another is I remember my point. Another thing about the past is that I feel like people had a bigger tie to their family and their community in the past, and a lot of times people will make decisions on, you know, how do I feel about this or what makes me happy. But I think a lot of people in the past would often like sacrifice something that they may want personally for what is good for the family, what is good for the community.
Well, and for the most part, marriage for a long time wasn't about love and affection. It was about basically how can I use how can I sell myself in a bargain with this other, the classic two kingdoms become united through marriage of one person's son to another person's daughter, and so on.
Well, the thing is, even when it did become a lot about love and affection, like it was still the idea of two families coming together and forming like a new addition to like their wider family. So like the family was still very much you know key to the whole thing, and it was still very important. But now, like, no matter how it will affect, like, say, a family or even their children, like the moment people like don't feel as connected to the person as they did before, like a lot of times they'll have affairs or just be gone.
Yeah, and I guess dovetailing this back to the original kind of impetus behind this discussion, which was the women being surprised that their men think about ancient history thing. I think part of that is because, sadly enough, I blame sitcoms. The image from the American sitcom that is like the long suffering, nagging, morally superior, and possibly intellectually and culturally superior wife suffering with the like Homer Simpson archetype. I think in a lot of ways, whether it's through direct internalization or just cultural osmosis, a lot of women have internalized this idea that it's their job to be the moral, cultural, and intellectual superior of their relationship, and that their men are these subhuman, slovenly idiot. Every the idea is that every man is Homer Simpson on some level, and every woman is Marge on some level. Or pick your favorite sitcom couple if you like. And I think it actually surprises women that men have a rich internal life. In many ways more rich than the average man, based on this meme, seems to have a wider ranging intellectual life than even their wives can keep up with. And I think that confused a lot of women. The idea, not only the idea that men do have this richer internal intellectual life, but also that they would need to, and that because from what I saw, a lot of the reaction to women was not just "Isn't that weird that my man thinks about these lofty intellectual pursuit things?" It was also, on some level, a lot of women were affronted why they were confused and almost offended that their men would even need to think about these higher intellectual pursuits. Like what almost a why is he concerning himself with the Roman Empire when day-to-day life is important as it is.
I mean, a lot of the reasons people think about the Roman Empire is that you know there are many similarities to our modern day societies to ancient Rome. Obviously, it's not a one for one comparison, but there
Again,
are.
it's a continuity thing, and you could make that claim. You could make that claim for just about every major civilization, be it the like threefold Mesoamerican civilization of the Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Olmecs and the Incas, or be it the Greco-Romans, or be it the Babylonians and Sumerians, be it the Egyptians, be it the Celts. Like these civilizations lasted for like 5,000 years apiece. So to say that nothing in them is relevant and that to this lofty intellectual is just frankly kind of silly.
I mean, not only that, but while our knowledge has advanced and technology has progressed, the the nature of what it means to be humans has not changed since ancient times. And so, like when there are things that are going on in society, you may see a parallel to something that may have happened in the past, and gain some insight from what happened in the past in regards to our current situation.
Well, it's the same reason why I find that of all the different kinds of psychology, evolutionary psychology is by far the most intellectually honest and the most interesting in a lot of ways, because we are relatively the same species that we were when we came out of the caves. And obviously, yeah, I know historically, um, Neanderthals and company used caves as sacred spaces and viewed it as a way to get involved with the underworld rather than like most people never lived in caves. Actually, caves were a sacred liminal space most of the time. But that's neither here nor there. My point is that we are roughly the same species that won the hominid wars all those years ago, minus some interbreeding with the other hominids that were in those hominid wars, prior to and just after the last ice age. Um, like we are relatively the same species, and our bodies and neurology still work in it. Like from our body's perspective, we are still in the Stone Age, and that's where a lot of um, the dissonance between the way a human being wants to function and the way the modern world incentivizes him to function. That's where the dissonance comes in, because our bodies and neurology still think we are one step removed from the cavemen, but our civilization is several thousand years more advanced than the cavemen.
Yeah, like there really is like a lot of moments that really that I think back in my life really remind me that yeah, this is probably still that inbuilt caveman behavior. Like, for example, like in college, there was this girl that I was talking to and I really liked, and then this other guy came in and interrupted us and started hitting on her. And my swear to God, my very first instinct was hit this man as hard as you can.
Like, where's my club? Well, yeah. Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. Fortunately, I don't have that quite as much because, well, I'm gay, and that does give me kind of a buffer to the inherent defend the women gynocentrism thing. But even I still do it, like to the point, like I always feel uncomfortable with the idea that a woman will see me as um like uncouth or barbaric. Like I always feel the need to be more respectful to women even than I am to. And don't get me wrong, I feel the need to be respectful to everyone, but there is that intrinsic, emotional, intuitive, oh good God, that's a woman, that's one of my betters, that's an aristocrat, um, in my brain, even though I'm a gay man. Like you would, and of course, I think everyone, no matter what sexuality they happen to lean to, they still have this reverent fear of their mothers, well into their old age. Like I am 20 freaking 8, and I still constantly am worried about my mother, whether it's how my mother is doing, or whether my mother will be pleased with me, or what have you. It's always there, even though I swing the other way when it comes to sex. Like no man escapes the gynocentrism bug because we are still raised by our mothers, and our mother is still the like blueprint for what it means to be a human on some level.
Well, the thing is, it's not just with mothers too. Like I care a lot about what my father thinks of me.
Well, obviously yes, but it does it still have that intrinsic like emotional gut punch to it
Yeah,
in
it does.
in the in the same way because I because even though I do care on some level about what my father thinks, and that's a whole other kettle of fish because my father is it's a whole bag of it. And this is the funny thing. We are both sitting here self-identifying men's rights advocates. I mean, for fuck's sake, we have a men's rights and men's issues show, and and between the two of us, neither one of us can still get past the gynocentrism bug. Even with all we know, even with all the research that we've done between ourselves, even with all our individual life experience, and in my case, even with my sexuality pointing in the opposite direction, we're both still on some level beholden to the gynocentrism bug. And I don't think it's a coincidence, for example, that the most popular men's rights advocates by far are the honey badgers, people like Karen Strawn and Alison Tiemann. No disrespect to Paul Elam or Warren Farrell or Tom Goldman or those kinds of people, because Lord knows where would we be without them. But I think it's still worth noting that um, the most subscribed to MRA channel by far and away is Karen Strawn, a woman.
And like it really is hard to it really this is really is a hard habit to right because a lot of times you don't even know you're doing it. Like I often find that when I'm in a room with a woman that I'm attracted to, I often find myself just like instinctually like changing my behavior to like exude more like strength.
It it happened to me recently because I don't know if you know, but on Englantine's channel we're doing a Marvel role playing game thing, and we recently got these two new players. One is named Amy, and I forget the other one's name, but they're both, not only are they both women, but they're both very feminine, and they were new to the setting, the role playing setting. So I found myself trying to step in and help them figure out the role playing setting. Mind you, again, not attracted to women under most circumstances. Not and I'm an MRA, but the thought of these extremely feminine, extremely sweet young girls being confused and befuddled and out of their depth on even something as simple as this role playing game we were doing bothered me on some level to the point where I literally caught myself going, wait, I am helping way more than I should be helping. Oh shit, it's the guy in sisters. Like I literally had to stop myself for a second. It was like, wait, I'm overdoing it. Shit. And when the gay MRA can do that, it literally there is no hope for any male human. I'm sorry.
Well, the thing is, like, when this instinct was built into us, like, we did not have a lot of the, either the problems or technologies of modern society that really just exacerbate them into massive problems.
Well, and there's the other thing too of we didn't exactly have the intellectual like obviously I'm not going to say that ancient man was stupid because that's stupid because again we haven't changed as a species in all that time.
What
But
you're saying is we hadn't come around to the idea yet.
yeah, we hadn't actually there was no men's rights movement in 5000 BC or whatever the fuck. Um, so a lot of the intellectual work done by people like Karen Strawn, Alison Tiemann, Hannah Wallen, Paul Elam, Tom Golden, Warren Farrell, that's a very very recent phenomenon, all things considered. Um, so like even though those of us who are MRAs intellectually know all of this stuff, I mean, how we're on what number of episodes of Duality of Man here?
Uh, I have no idea. God only knows because we don't number them.
Yeah, but I gotta think we're at least in the like 50s somewhere. Um,
Probably.
I'm gonna have to count when we're done, but yeah, we're in the 50s somewhere, and we have touched on every major topic um that relates to men's issues and then some, I think. And even knowing all of that, even regularly making use of that information on various podcasts and in my own personal life, because long story short, a friend of my mom's is a textbook case of a father who got completely bent over a barrel by men's rights issues, um, and is currently dealing with a borderline ex of his. So even using this information practically in my day-to-day life and using it regularly on a podcast, I still find myself intuitively being more respectful to women and trying to be more polite to women than I would be to men. Which isn't to say I would be actively impolite to men because that's stupid, but there's still that gynocentrism bug in my brain.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things that human beings enjoy about past eras are things that would allow us to act upon the best parts of our human nature without the restrictions of modern society. Because goddamn, there's so many things that I wish I could do, just that modern society would prevent me from doing with all the laws and restrictions and everything. Like nothing like bad or harmful, but just it would be like so much. It would be a lot more fun to live life without like a constant overbearing system breathing down your throat.
And again, that's not to say that you have to, return to Monkey or become a neo-Luddite in like the Henry David Thoreau or Unabomber style. I think what most people mean when they say this, when they have this kind of nostalgia, especially for ancient eras, is they want to maintain what we've gained in the modern period, but also recapture the good stuff that we've lost in the interim. Like for example, and this is one of those areas where I come up against Jordan Peterson because he tends to overemphasize the Christianization of history and how that was good for humanity and everything. But there are also ways in which polytheistic Rome was better than Christian Rome. and it's very controversial, and it rubs a lot of people the wrong way when I say that. But for example, um, prior to Rome's conversion to Christianity, when they conquered a new territory, it was a lot smoother of a transition because the tribes and people that were conquered could keep their own gods because the Romans were polytheistic. So it was more of a, you know, you can keep your gods, just make room for ours and make room for the emperor and make sure you pay your taxes and all will be well. And here's some roads and aqueducts and what have you. And of course, when Rome converted to Christianity, that was a no-go zone anymore because in a monotheistic framework or allegedly monotheistic framework, um, you have to reframe any metaphysical entity you come across that isn't your god as either you have to relabel it somehow, either as a demon, as a fairy, or as a saint. Um, and so it was a lot harsher on people who were converted post Christianization of Rome. And if I must be if I must be this asshole, I do think the conversion to monotheism was a major contributor to the fall of Rome. Because when you could be a fellow polytheist, when you could be inclusive of the gods that your your the conquered would have, you could just, you know, we already have multiple gods, let's just add a few. Whereas when you're a Christian, that thing has to be something other than a god, whether it's a demon, whether it's a Nephilim, whether it's a saint, whether it's something. You have to reframe it and recontextualize it. And most people are very protective of their metaphysical beliefs. Therefore, when you try to reframe and contextualize someone else's um, pantheon, especially when you demonize a lot of it, um, you will get a fuck ton more pushback, which will, for example, incense and incentivize the Gauls and the former Celts to get really, really pissed off at you, and then, well, boom, the fall of Rome. So, yeah, even things that you wouldn't think. History is less of a progress forward and more of a give and take. There are things that you have to lose in order to gain other things. And the best thing about that is, even if it's true in the moment that you have to give up this good thing for this other good thing, you can actually, by means of nostalgia, look back and go, hang on, is there a way that we can make these two good things coexist? And then there's more good in the world as a result.
One thing, uh, one thing that really annoys me is how a lot of the progressives will look back on history and say this never should have happened, or if I could go back and change this, I would. Well, the thing is, like, there are a lot of terrible things that have happened, like to like say my ancestors, because I'm black, and my ancestors were slave. But the thing is, like, while slavery was horrible and abhorrent, I'm also smart enough to acknowledge that if it didn't happen, I probably would not even exist.
Yeah. Also, let's be honest here. The perennial problem of all of this retconning of history is you end up strawmanning history because, as we just went over, the people who came out of the caves are basically the same as we are sitting here today. We are the same kinds of people that we ever were. And that means that the people who did bad things, in the same way that we in our modern day have to convince ourselves we're in the moral right to do things, they often had to do the same thing. And what's more, if you actually look into history, we know they did the same thing because we have their diaries and their, court transcripts and the chroniclers and so on. We know that in order to do what we would define as a bad thing, very often, just like the modern day moralist has to go through mental gymnastics to convince themselves they're doing a good thing when in fact they're doing a terrible thing. So too, it wasn't as simple as "Grr, I mustache twirlingly hate other, therefore I'm going to do bad things to other." It's always some it's always a more complex rationale. And yes, that applies to even someone like the Nazis. If you actually read Mein Kampf and you read the like letters and diary entries of Nazis, they did have to, just like everyone else, go through the mental gymnastics of explaining why they were in the right to do what they did. Which means that everyone in history probably had some loftier rationale for doing the things that we define as evil. And if you actually want to address the things that lead to these horrible travesty, you have to actually meet the person where they live. You actually have to look at their framework. And rather than recontextualize their framework and say, no, you were never doing a good thing. You never even tried to do a good thing. You were doing a bad thing all along and you knew you were doing a bad thing. Instead of doing that, you have to actually take the argument on good faith, the argument that the person made, and explain to them why they're wrong. And if you can't do that, or are unwilling to do that, or don't believe you should do that, you will never actually solve these problems. You're never going to be able to go back to, slavery period America and go, well, slavery is just wrong by default, therefore you shouldn't do it. You actually have to look at the reasons why people gave for why they wanted them, and then try to explain to them why they were wrong to do so, or why their knowledge of the world was incomplete at the time. And what's more, in history, we've seen cases where people have done that, and they've been convinced that they were wrong. Like the famous example of the black guy who made it his mission in life to deconvert um, Ku Klux Klan members. He did so by basically showing them that, hey, a black guy can be a human. And if a black guy can be a human, then I'm kind of an asshole for doing all this evil shit, aren't I?
Yeah. So we've been going for an hour. Let's wrap up. Do you have any final thoughts?
Never let them shame you for your sense of idealization or nostalgia of the past. But also never strawman history. Everything in the past was just as three-dimensional, just as complicated, and just as human as you were. And the moment that you start dehumanizing or viewing people in the past as primitive or stupid or evil is the moment you're probably beginning to strawman history. Do not let yourself strawman history. And traditionalists, don't let yourself fall victim to the recontextualizations of history done by people who are strawmanning history. I.e., no, the past wasn't a patriarchal, misogynistic hellhole. And whether you consider that a bad thing or a good thing, the important bit is that it's wrong, period. It is incorrect. It is ahistorical. And you're
One
only
thing,
you're only going to actually be able to be a traditionalist if you actually engage with what traditionalism actually is, and not what the modern day reinterpretation of it was.
one thing I want to say regarding history is that we form our opinions based on incomplete knowledge about history. We have, some records, we have some preserved writings, but it will never be the same as actually being able to talk to those people. It will never be the same as actually being able to hear the conversation that they had with each other that were not written down to be there for the events while they were actually occurring. So we form these positive or negative views of history based on incomplete knowledge, and we judge these people in history while never actually knowing who the people, the fully, as you mentioned, three-dimensional people that they actually were.
All the more reason to try to be as educated on the subject as possible and to be as intellectually charitable as possible, i.e., don't dehumanize or primitivize the past.
Yeah. All right, everybody. I've been Mystery.
I've been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator, and we have been the Duality of Man. Cheers, guys.
Bye, everybody.